In front of everyone, the officer's pride crumbled after insulting a black person. His humiliation caught on countless recording phones. The late afternoon sun dipped low over Westbridge, casting long golden shadows across the cracked sidewalks. Maya Caldwell moved through the familiar streets with quiet confidence, an assurance shaped by years of discipline, of knowing exactly who she was. Her dark brown eyes scanned the neighborhood, once home, now distant, like a childhood memory left untouched for too long. 7 years. 7 years since she enlisted. 7 years since she buried her mother. The streets hadn't changed much, if at all. The same corner store still advertised 2-for-1 sodas, its neon sign flickering like it had always been on the verge of death. The same barbershop, its faded sign hanging stubbornly, and the same basketball court where kids played as if their futures depended on every dribble and shot. Some things refused to change. The air smelled of fried catfish from Miss Burnett's restaurant, a scent that had once meant comfort. Now it pulled at something deeper, something Maya had spent years keeping locked away. She adjusted the duffel bag over her shoulder, her movements steady, precise, almost mechanical. She wasn't wearing anything that screamed military, just a fitted t-shirt, cargo pants, and sneakers worn for miles traveled. But even in civilian clothes, she carried herself differently. Shoulders squared, chin level, steps measured. Her father had called it warrior posture. Maya barely noticed the group of teenagers lingering outside the corner store until one of them, a lanky kid, maybe 16, glanced up, did a double take, then nodded. "You military?" he asked. Maya met his gaze, studying him. "Something like that." The boy grinned. "Figured. My cousin's in the army. Walks like you." Before she could respond, one of his friends called him inside. And just like that, the moment passed. Maya exhaled slowly, a small smile tugging at the corners of her mouth. Moments like that reminded her why she fought, why she endured. She had spent years in places most people only saw on TV. Kandahar, Fallujah, Mogadishu. Led teams through the dead of night, through chaos and enemy fire, through sandstorms that swallowed sound and light. And now she was here as a soldier trained for war, walking streets that felt both familiar and foreign. She had spent her 20s in combat zones, her 30s trying to process the cost of war. And at 40, she wasn't even sure what home meant anymore. Her thoughts were interrupted by the slow creep of a patrol car rolling up beside her. Something about its pace felt wrong. Cops didn't cruise through this neighborhood like that. They either sped through, windows up, or they stopped with purpose. Maya kept walking, pretending not to notice. The window rolled down. "Excuse me, miss." She stopped, turned slightly. Officer Ryan Mercer leaned against the open window, mirrored sunglasses concealing his eyes. But his smirk was clear enough. The kind that suggested he enjoyed this, whatever this was. Thick arms crossed. Voice too casual. "Mind telling me what you're doing around here?" Maya studied him for a beat, unreadable. She had dealt with men like him before, men who mistook confidence for challenge. "Just walking," she said. Her tone, even at Mercer's smirk, faded just a little. "Where to?" Maya arched a brow. "Didn't realize I needed an itinerary to walk my own street." His jaw tightened. "We've had some break-ins around here. Gotta make sure everything's in order." Her gaze didn't waver. "You see me breaking into something?" A muscle twitched in Mercer's jaw. He exhaled sharply, like he didn't appreciate being questioned. "Just doing my job." Maya inhaled through her nose. Exhaled slow, controlled. "Well, I'm just walking." But Mercer wasn't done. "Hold on a second. Let's see some ID." Maya didn't move. She had been trained to assess threats, body language, surroundings, exits. Right now, she wasn't just assessing a cop. She was assessing a man getting too comfortable with his authority. And she already knew one thing. This wasn't going to end quietly. The tension thickened. She could feel Mercer's gaze boring into her, trying to intimidate. That IT didn't work. She had been through worse. Much worse than some small-town cop throwing his weight around. Mercer's hand hovered near his belt, not quite reaching for his gun. "Not yet. You're not from around here, are you?" His voice had shifted. More accusatory. Maya didn't flinch. "I live here." Mercer hesitated, studying her. "I've been patrolling this area for years," he said, voice measured. "Never seen you before." Maya tilted her head slightly. "Maybe you missed me." A flicker of frustration crossed his face. He leaned forward, just enough to make his presence more imposing. "Look, lady, I don't know who you think you are, but I'm just doing my job. Like I said, we've had break-ins, and I need to make sure you're not up to anything." Maya's voice stayed steady. "Up to anything? You have no reason to think I'm up to anything." His fingers twitched at his side. A small movement. Subtle, but she recognized it. The moment a man starts feeling like he's losing control, Maya wasn't about to give it back to him. "I'm just walking, officer." Her voice stayed level, controlled. "And I've done nothing wrong." Mercer's eyes narrowed. "Then let me see your ID." Maya didn't hesitate. She reached into her pocket slowly, fingers brushing against the ID she carried for moments like this. She pulled it out and held it up between them, not handing it over, just showing it, daring him. Mercer's gaze flicked to the card. His lips curled in mild disgust. "Navy SEAL, huh?" he muttered, reading the words aloud, like they tasted bitter. He looked at her again. "That's cute. But how do I know this is real?" Maya held his stare, unblinking. "Run it through your system," she said. "You'll find out soon enough." Mercer didn't move. He wasn't just trying to verify her identity anymore, he was trying to dominate her. T.O. proved something, and it wasn't going to happen. Danced toward his radio. But Maya saw it before he made the call. This was no longer just about her ID, it was about power. And Officer Ryan Mercer wasn't prepared to lose that. "You want backup?" "For what?" Maya asked, her tone calm, but laced with a sharp edge. The tone of a woman who had been through far worse and knew exactly how to handle it. "Because I'm not the problem here." Mercer hesitated, his fingers hovering over the radio. For the first time since their interaction began, there was a flicker of doubt in his eyes. He hadn't expected this kind of resistance. He had expected compliance, submission. What he was getting was something else entirely. A woman who refused to back down, who refused to shrink in the face of authority. "Backup for an uncooperative suspect," Mercer muttered, his voice tight. But there was hesitation now, a crack in his confidence. Maya could hear the murmurs from a crowd, people beginning to voice their disbelief. "Uncooperative." Maya raised an eyebrow. "You're the one who stopped me for no reason." The whispers grew louder. Some of the onlookers started shaking their heads, even speaking up. The balance of power was shifting, and Mercer could feel it. He wasn't in control anymore. The once casual interaction had turned into something far more intense. This wasn't just about her walking down the street. It was about power, about control. And Mercer wasn't the one holding it. More people had stopped to watch. Across the street, a man leaned against a food truck, arms folded, observing. The young woman recording earlier had moved closer, her phone still high, capturing every moment. Mercer flexed his fingers around Maya's ID, as though searching for a way to twist the situation to fit his narrative. His pride wouldn't let him back down. "You sure this isn't a fake?" His voice dripped with condescension. Maya stood firm. "Run it through your system. You'll know it's real." But the ID wasn't the issue. This was personal. Mercer wasn't just questioning her identity. He was questioning her right to be here. On this street, in this neighborhood, that he flicked the ID back and forth, searching for a flaw. But there was nothing. "You really expect me to believe you've been out there fighting for this country?" Mercer scoffed. "Navy SEAL? Please. A woman like you." The insult stung, but Maya didn't let it show. She had learned long ago that it didn't matter what others thought of her. It only mattered what she thought of herself. Instead of responding, she just stared at him, silent, unmoved. The young woman's phone was still recording. Others had begun doing the same. Mercer shifted uncomfortably, realizing the growing audience. His smirk slipped. The crowd wasn't just watching anymore. They were witnessing. Maya noticed the shift in their mood. Whispers turned to quiet statements. The weight of their presence was pressing against Mercer now, not her. Mercer stiffened. His jaw clenched tighter. His eyes darted around, searching for a way to regain control. This wasn't how things were supposed to go. With a sharp, frustrated breath, Mercer's hand moved toward his belt. Maya's senses went on high alert. She watched every movement, the tightening of his fingers, the subtle shift in his stance. The crowd was silent now, anticipating. Her body became poised, ready. But she didn't step back, didn't flinch. Mercer's fingers hovered over his cuffs. "I'm going to need backup for this one," he muttered. Maya saw right through it. Backup for what? For refusing to hand over my ID? For walking down my own street? His mouth opened, but no words came out. His eyes flicked toward the crowd, then back to her. And for the first time, she saw doubt. "You gonna keep making a scene?" a man called out from the corner store. "She didn't do anything wrong," another woman chimed in. "Just let her go." But Mercer wasn't listening. His ego had already been bruised. He still thought he could force her to submit. The atmosphere had shifted. What started as a routine stop had become an open confrontation, a showdown between authority and resistance, between pride and humility. The crowd wasn't passive anymore. They were part of the moment. Mercer's fingers twitched above his cuffs, his body stiff with frustration. Maya's eyes never left him, her expression calm. But inside, she was calculating. She wasn't going to let him escalate this. She wasn't going to let him turn this into something ugly. He reached for his cuffs. The moment his fingers brushed the cold metal, Maya moved. It wasn't aggression. It was control. With seamless, fluid precision, she stepped back and pivoted just enough to break his grip before it could even fully form. Mercer wasn't prepared for it. He tried to grab her again. But she was already out of reach. Her posture was still unwavering. Her presence undeniable. She hadn't even broken a sweat. And yet, in that moment, she had completely undone him. The crowd gasped and a few murmurs rose. And Maya just stood there, watching, waiting. Mercer had already lost. He just didn't know it yet. The street had gone silent. The weight of 100 eyes bore down on Officer McAllister as he stood frozen in place, his authority crumbling before him. He was used to control, to compliance. But now, in front of this crowd, with cameras recording his every move, he had lost. Maya Caldwell stood her ground, her posture steady, unwavering. She had done nothing but defend herself, nothing but refuse to be another victim of unchecked power. The words of her late father echoed in her mind. Pick your battles, and win the ones that matter. This battle had mattered. Sergeant Ryan Mercer, standing beside McAllister, let out a slow breath before speaking. "Officer McAllister, you're relieved of duty, effective immediately." His voice was calm, but there was no mistaking the finality in his tone. McAllister's face drained of color, his fists clenched at his sides, his jaw tightening as if he were searching for a response, but none came. He knew there was no way to justify his actions. Not here. Not now. A murmur swept through the crowd. Some people exchanged glances, others nodded in approval. The woman with the phone, still recording, smirked as she captured the moment of his downfall. Maya's heart pounded, but outwardly, she remained composed. She wasn't afraid of McAllister, not anymore. His power had been an illusion, and now, under the weight of public scrutiny, that illusion had shattered. Mercer turned toward her. "Ms. Caldwell," he said, his voice softer now. "Do you want to press charges?" The question hung in the air. The crowd leaned in, waiting for her answer. She could see it in their eyes. Some wanted justice, others revenge. But Maya wasn't here for either. "No," she said, her voice steady. "I didn't come here looking for a fight." She let that sink in before adding, "I just wanted to walk home." Mercer studied her for a moment, then nodded. "Understood." McAllister exhaled sharply through his nose, shaking his head in disbelief. "This isn't over," he muttered under his breath. Maya met his gaze, unflinching. "Yes, it is." With that, she turned away. The weight of the moment pressed down on her as she walked through the crowd. People parted to let her through, some murmuring words of support, others simply watching in awe. She didn't need applause, didn't need validation. She had done what was right, that was enough. Westbridge had always been a city of power struggles, of those who ruled and those who were ruled. But tonight, something had changed. Tonight, the people had seen what happened when someone refused to be silenced. As she walked away, Maya felt a presence beside her. "Hell of a way to make an entrance," a familiar voice said. She glanced over to see Westbridge journalist Daniel Harlow keeping pace with her, his camera bag slung over one shoulder. His sharp eyes gleamed with curiosity. "You gonna run a story on this?" Maya asked, arching an eyebrow. "Already writing the headline in my head," Daniel said with a grin. "But I'd rather hear it from you. Why didn't you press charges?" Maya sighed. "Because it wasn't just about me." She gestured back toward the crowd. "They saw it. They won't forget it. That matters more than a legal case. Daniel nodded thoughtfully. Smart move. He hesitated, then added, but McAllister isn't the only one like that. There'll be others. I know. Maya had no illusions about the battle ahead. Westbridge was full of men like McAllister, men who thought power made them untouchable. Tonight had been a victory, but it wasn't the ENDS. She turned the corner onto her street. She heard the distant sound of sirens. The night wasn't over for some, but for Maya, it was time to rest. She had stood tall, and for now that was enough. The fight wasn't over, but she was ready for whatever came next.